So I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I don't know if it's my age or where I'm from, but this was always a hat. It was never a cap. Notice I grabbed the 06 World Series champs hat. 2011 World Series was unbelievable. Game 6, David Freese hitting that walk-off home run after the triple to tie it up in the bottom of the ninth. Unbelievable. Anyways, this was always called a hat. I always called it a hat. I played baseball through high school. It was always a hat. It was never a cap. Today, we're not going to be talking about these types of caps or hats. We're going to be talking about cap management as it relates to winemaking. Let me put this back. We should probably put okay, let's think here. We beat Detroit in 06 and Texas in 11. I don't have any Detroit or Texas wine. Like so. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about cap management. What does it mean in terms of red wine making, and what are some different methods for managing your cap? Let's get started. This video comes from Kara, who lives in Boulder, Colorado. Sends me texts or sends me questions every once in a while because she's really into the science of winemaking and wants to know more about red wine making in terms of cap management. So I want to break it down here. I have a whole nother video talking about red winemaking versus white winemaking. So check that out. That gives a little bit more in depth on this topic. But basically in red winemaking, we use the skins when we make the wine. Okay, that's where all the color comes from, is from the skins. In white winemaking, we don't use the skins. That's the big difference. Again, check out that video. You can check out my fermentation video. Moving on, in red wine, we use the skins. In white wine, we do not use the skins. When we use the skins in winemaking, that's where cap management comes in. Because when we put yeast into red wine, they start eating the sugar. I know I plug a lot of videos here, but it does kind of help to give other context. There's a whole nother video on fermentation, but basically what the yeast do is they eat sugar, they produce heat, they produce CO2, carbon dioxide, and they also produce ethanol. Okay, that's basically, but check out that fermentation video. That'll give a much greater detail on the topic. So when the yeast produce all that CO2, it bubbles. It comes up, bubbles out of the fermentation vessel, no matter what you're using. It comes up, it rises up. And as it rises up, it brings all of the skins with it. So the very top of the fermentation vessel is what is called the cap. It's all these skins. So you have all these skins, and then below it is all of this liquid. It's kind of juice wine mixture. It's basically juice turning into wine, but you have all this liquid and then all these skins. Well, the majority of the flavor compounds we like in red wine come from the skins. Also, the color comes from the skins too. So we want to manage that cap by reincorporating the skins back into the solution down below, back into the liquid down below. The reason we manage the cap is twofold. Like I said earlier, a lot of the flavor and all the colors come from the skins. But secondly, if you don't manage your cap properly, it can dry out and you can get bacteria that grows on top of there, and so that's not good. So those are the two main reasons that we do manage caps, is flavor and color, and then secondly, if you don't, you can get some spoilage bacteria that lives on there. Possibly. There's a ton of CO2 being produced, so you kind of have this blanket of CO2, so you're kind of protected that way from microorganisms, but you can still get things that can start living on the skins, and that's not good. So my analogy for this is almost think of making tea, if you ever make tea. So if you get a hot cup of water and you put a tea bag on top, you're gonna get some flavor, you're gonna get some extraction, but what most people do is they kind of steep it. They keep mixing it in to pull out more and more flavor. You could just set it on there and that'd be fine, but you're not gonna get as much flavor or color if you just let it sit on top. As you steep it, you're extracting more flavor and more color. So that's the best analogy I can come up with managing the cap. Now there's different ways to do this. I'm gonna talk about 4 main ways: punch down, pump over, rack and return, and pulsar. So what I use for making my wine, my red wines, is a punch down, which basically I ferment all of our wines in very small 1.5 to 2 ton fermentation vessels. This is very small. I don't have big tanks or anything. This is very small batch winemaking. So what I do is I stand on top of our fermentation and I punch down. We have this paddle, this tool, and you just punch it down because the solids all come up to the top, and you can see when you punch it down, it kind of breaks up, it falls back down. We do this 3 times a day, right when we get there in the morning, right around lunchtime, and right before we go home at night. Then we come back the next morning and start all over again. Do it again first thing in the morning, at lunchtime, and again right before we go home. I'll say this a lot throughout the video. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. It kind of just depends on the style you're going for. And again, here, big caveat, gross generalization is some people will say punch downs may give the wine a little bit more of a more masculine character, a little bit more stronger tannins and stronger backbone, because you're forcibly breaking up the grapes. You're really punching it down. It's a hell of a workout. The next term I'm gonna talk about is another popular one that's called pump over. What does this mean? So a pump over is when you hook up a pump and you take all of the juice from the bottom of the tank and bring it out and pump it over the cap. So you're basically spraying the cap with the juice / wine, because the juice is in a process, it's turning into wine, but you're spraying the juice or wine over the cap and getting extraction that way. So for pump over, sorry, this is kind of a terrible analogy, but I almost think of it like basting a turkey, like you keep taking the liquid out and putting it over the thing. Winemaking and cooking a turkey are totally different, but the concept kind of holds true. Basically, you're taking the liquid from the bottom and then putting it back over the top of the skins. This is a garbage analogy. Anyways, you get the point. You're pumping the juice, the liquid from the bottom and spraying it back over the top. Another one that might be used in bigger wineries is called rack and return. And so what this is you might have 2 tanks. The downside of this is you do need 2 tanks, one to be empty and one to be full. Because what you do is you have this cap on top of all this liquid. You suck all the liquid out and move it over into a new tank, and then the cap sinks down. Then you have 2 tanks full. One is full of just liquid and the other one's full of all the cap, all of just the skins. Then you take all of this and spray it back over the top. It's called rack and return. Again, downside is you have to have 2 tanks, you have to clean 2 tanks, then you have to go back and clean that other tank. And it's mostly used, I would say, in bigger wineries. Not necessarily, but this is usually a big winery with big tanks that they would use a process like this. The last one I'm gonna talk about today is a process that's called pulse air. And what this is a machine that you use to pulse air into the bottom of the tank, and then the air comes up and kind of volcanoes out and breaks up the cap that way. I do use this intermittently in some of our winemaking because yeast do need a little bit of oxygen, a little bit of O2 when they're fermenting. So this is a good way to give them a little bit of oxygen by pumping air into it. Air is like 78% nitrogen. Let's look that up. I know it's 78% nitrogen, but I forget. It's not all oxygen. Most people know that. Well, I don't know if everybody knows that. Percentage of air breakdown. Okay, by volume, dry air contains, oh, that's right, 78% nitrogen, 21 oxygen, 0.1 argon, and 0.04 CO2, carbon dioxide. So the majority of the air you're pumping in there is nitrogen, N3 gas. It's not doing anything, just like us. We breathe in N3 gas. N3 gas? N2 gas. Jesus. Nitrogen gas formula. I think it's N2. Yeah, it's N2. So yeah, that's the breakdown of air. And so even us, when we breathe in nitrogen, when we breathe in N2 gas, we don't do anything with it. We breathe it in and we breathe it right back out. We breathe in oxygen, our blood takes that, our lungs take that. Not a doctor, but all I know is that the N2 gas, we can't do anything with. Same with the yeast. So you're pumping in all this air, they're eating up the oxygen that's in that air. So yeah, pulse air is a cool cap management. Again, I said I use it intermittently. If I think that I need to give the yeast during fermentation a little bit of more oxygen, I'll switch out one of my midday punch downs with a pulse air. I'll switch those out and just do a punch down in the morning, pulse air at lunchtime, and then punch it back down at evening, based on where the fermentation is, based on a lot of factors. But I may intermittently throw in a pulse air just to give those yeast cells a little bit extra oxygen. I know my analogies are kind of garbage today. I might just call this the garbage analogy cam. But when I was a little kid, I had like a little, I'll never forget this, like a little sippy cup, and it had a straw that went like all the way down to the bottom. And then like sometimes I would put like cereal in there or whatever. And then I would blow it. That's almost like pulse air, because then you're blowing air into the bottom and then it would like bubble up. My parents would get pissed because I'd probably make a mess all over the kitchen table. But then it would kind of mix up the cereal, mix all the stuff up that's floating on the top. So yeah, that's my analogy for my pulse air. I could still visualize that cup. It's this little blue cup, It was all dented and from like bite marks and whatever. So that kind of does it for cap management. Those are the four main types that I wanted to talk about. Kind of a short video, but now it's time to dive into our moon fact of the day. So today's moon fact is about an article I was reading the other day called the Lunar Crater Radio Telescope, LCRT for short. But basically what this is this is a NASA project where they're working on putting a telescope, a radio telescope, on the far side of the moon so that they can view out into space, and then the moon will block all of the Earth noise that comes from Earth, all of our radio signals, all of our lights, everything that comes from Earth. It'll be on the far side of the moon, sunk in a crater, and so then it can shoot out into space and view all these things. Kind of exciting stuff. Yeah, being on the far side of the moon is really cool because it blocks out, like I said, all that Earth noise. But then two, most of our land-based telescopes have to adjust for the atmosphere because the atmosphere kind of distorts it. Being on the moon, that won't be an issue either. So it's kind of twofold. There's no atmosphere to mess with, and then just all of the other noise that we create here on Earth, that'll be not an issue either. I couldn't find an exact timeline on this. I think right now they're trying to pick out a crater that they want to use on the far side of the moon, and then develop a telescope that will like almost sit inside the crater. So I think it's just still in its infancy, but something down the road that might be kind of cool. We might have a moon-based telescope on the far side of the moon. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks again to Kara for a great question. If you got any comments or questions or other things you want to get in touch with me, there's always three ways. Comment field below. You can always drop me an email, or there's also this kind of little blue box over here that sends a text to my phone. So any of those three things are great ways to get in touch with me. Thanks again for watching, and thanks again for being a Wine Club member. Hope you have fun watching these videos and you find some value in them. That's going to do it for me. Keep drinking wine and keep looking up. Thanks so much. You'll start to get the idea of how wet red wine